I'm gonna make my list of, I think, not necessarily who needs to be inducted this year, but good suggestions that I think should be inducted. You can share your suggestions along with the comments. Stu Hart's a good choice. Interesting with him is he's the only guy in that case that's never been employed by the WWE and is still getting inducted. How about that? I don't think that's a problem. I think he needs and he deserves to be acknowledged by the WWE. He had the Stampede Wrestling Company. He intermixed wrestlers with the WWE at the time. Soon when WWE started to expand, he had to give up his company, Stampede Wrestling. They let in like the late 80s or something, could be like that. They later resurrected through Ross Hart, and well, they ceased to exist once again a few years ago. And just think of the wrestler that has passed through the Hart house and down in the basement called the Hart Dungeon, the training center. It's Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Jim Neidhart, Davey Boy Smith, Brian Pillman, along with Ross Hart, Bruce Hart, Keith Hart, Wayne Hart, Keith Hart, Jim Neidhart's daughter Natalia Neidhart, Tyson Kidd, the last graduate, as they say, from the Hart Dungeon, trained by Bret Hart. You have D.H. Smith, Gene Kiniski, Gene Anderson, Chris Jericho, Edge, Mark Henry, Lance Storm, Greg the Hammer Valentine, Fritz von Erich, who later started his own territory with his von Erich Sons, Texas Tornadoes, etc. They were inducted last year. There is so many big names from that Hart Dungeon. Dynamite Kid as well, Stomper, Abdullah the Butcher, Nikolai Volkov even was there. So there's so many big names from that Hart Dungeon. His shoot style of grappling, of teaching that style to wrestlers, really forced them to learn how to handle pain and to be mentally strong. That so many wrestlers today lack, that mental psychological aspect of the wrestling business. Stu Hart, inducted by Bret Hart, I believe that's going to be the case. Really deserving, and he meant so much for the wrestlers that has come through today. If a wrestler came from the Hart Dungeon, you really knew what you got at the time. It's not like that anymore. There should be guys like Stu Hart on this earth. That's all I have to say, and he deserves being acknowledged by the WWE. If we're going to induct Stu Hart, there's also going to be talks of guys whom he trained in the Hart Foundation. WWE has always made a value of, at the same time as they induct people into the Hall of Fame, kind of deliver a DVD, make the wrestlers come back on TV, and there is talks of the Hart Foundation DVD, and that makes you talk a guy like British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, who unfortunately passed in 2002. He made a huge mark in WWE. For instance, he main evented SummerSlam 1992 at Wembley Stadium in England with Bret Hart for the Intercontinental Championship. He won numerous tag team titles. His tag team, along with with Owen Hart, one of the best tag teams in my mind of all times. They were so complete as a tag team. He was a tag team champion with Dynamite Kid, who also went through the Hart Dungeon, by the way. So there is just so much talent in that guy, and he really deserves to be inducted in my mind sooner or later. And I don't see a problem with him being inducted, actually, except for I mean, some strained relationships with Diana Hart, perhaps, and I don't think she has a strained relationship with WWE and Vince, actually, so I think that shouldn't be a problem. And when you mention him, of course, you can't bring him in without taking Owen Hart in, and that's where it becomes tricky, because the way Owen Hart harnessed in 1999 makes it tricky. You gotta understand that you can't just bring him in with any approach, under any circumstances. You really gotta bring him in with the right circumstance, and then if they're gonna bring him in, this is perhaps the time and the only time that they could ever do it, with Bret Hart being the link between Owen Hart and the WWF, WWE, and the Hart family. I know Martha Hart, Owen Hart's widow, isn't a big wrestling fan. She never was. She really despised it, from what I understood. But I believe she and Bret is actually one of the few Hart members that get along with Martha. So maybe that could work out, and he deserves to be acknowledged. His children, in my mind, need to know what a big star he was, and well, if they're going to honor Stu Hart and indirectly Bret Hart this year with his supposed match at WrestleMania, as it's talked about, and Davey Boy Smith, they should bring in Owen Hart as well. Jim Neidhart, possibly, I don't know. What do you think? But that's the tricky situation with Owen Hart. You gotta understand that. So, yeah. And while we're at it with Canadian wrestlers, Canadian promoters, how about the Tunnys? Very little talk about these guys. Jack Tunney passed away in 2004, I believe. He wasn't even 70 years old. And his cousin, Eddie Tunney, they had a wrestling promotion in Toronto. Stu was in Calgary, he was in Toronto, a huge market. And to this day, I believe that actually the Tunnys and the followers, though the Maple Leaf Garden is seldom used, it's a mecca for wrestling. It's a that arena is a sanctuary, more or less. I believe the Tunnys are still the only ones that are allowed to promote wrestling events in that arena, so that says something about the accomplishments of Jack and Eddie Tunney several decades ago. He opened up the bridge. He had several wrestlers from NWA and WWE, WWF at the time, wrestle in his promotion, and then he sent his talent, and they have an intermix and an exchange with each other, So, however, he later gave up his company when WWE tried to expand. He joined WWF, and he was the key figure when WWE promoted events in Toronto, Canada. I believe he promoted like up to 50 events a year. That's a lot. And he had so many contacts. He knew the business, he knew the markets, he knew the surroundings, he knew the environment. So he was a key figure when WWE, during their expansion in the 80s, moved over to Canada, the Canadian border, went into Canada, took over Toronto. And as we all know, Toronto really is one of the big WWE cities. Remember WrestleMania 6? That was much of Jack Tunney's work when WWE was in Skydome and Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Challenge. He later out to the younger Wrestling fans, he was known as the president of the WWF. That was just a made-up role to honor him and to give him an award for the work he had done. He appeared on WWE and WWF television to make important announcements, such as stripping people of titles, making new #1 contenders, suspending people, and, well, not always favorable decisions, but he had to do them, and he had a stigma to him of being the adamant authority figure. When I was little, I saw him as a principal. He looked like a very solemn principal whom you did not question. It was always pretty solemn, and he was a classy guy, and the Tunnys, they deserve it to be in the Hall of Fame. I think we're also going to add a manager this year. Managers were very key figures and important roles and mouthpieces of the wrestlers in the 80s and somewhere through the 90s, before the wrestlers were supposed to learn to speak for themselves. And this year, why not William Moody? Now, who's William Moody? That's the guy that wrestled as Percy Pringle. Now, who's that? That's the guy who managed as Paul Bearer, the manager of The Undertaker, which was so key in making The Undertaker feel this airy, weird character. I say William Moody, Paul Bearer, Percy Pringle into the Hall of Fame of 2010. Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, I think he should be inducted this year. There's been a lot of talk about the internet about him, and already in 1982 he was deemed and he was crowned the most hated heel in the wrestling community. That was even before making it to the WWF, which he did somewhere around in 1987. So that's how big of a heel he was. He was so hated, he was arrogant, he was cocky, and he was just, you just love to hate this guy. And compare him, fans today want to see Kofi Kingston as champions, Jack Swagger, guys with a little more than 3 years of wrestling experience. Look at Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. When he arrived in the WWF, he already had 12 years of pro wrestling experience, and he never became the champion. He was in the finals of being crowned the champion at WrestleMania 4 when he wrestled and lost to Macho Man in the finals of crowning the champion there. So Macho Man became the champion, but still, he was never champion, and people want to have Kofi Kingston, Swagger, and guys like champions who haven't even been around for a cup of coffee in the wrestling business. So that's a good comparison. He was champion in several other promotions. His son, Ted DiBiase, is about to break out as a known star. That's why it's a very good situation to bring in Ted DiBiase Jr. the night before WrestleMania, have him induct his father, then go on to WrestleMania to face Randy Orton. The $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, into this year's Hall of Fame. WWE annually brings in about 7 or 8 or 9 wrestlers or entities into their Hall of Fame. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go on with Bob Backlund, who, like me, is of Swedish descent. He won the belt first time in 1978, held for almost 2 years, then won it again in 1979 and 1981. The 1981 title he actually held for 2 years. Then he was gone for a long while, came back in 1994 and won the belt at Survivor Series from Bret Hart. And that's a huge feat in itself. And the first title he won in 1978 was in Madison Square Garden. So he has accomplished a lot. He's so far yet not in the Hall of Fame. He's a 4-time champion. He should be there. He's also a former tag team champion along with another Hall of Famer, Pedro Morales. So he should go into the Hall of Fame in my book. He won the world titles in 3 different decades in the WWE. And then we also had the fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes, Buddy Roberts, Terry Gordy, who is the father of current WWE wrestler Jesse, also known as Slam Master Jay. These were the antagonists of Von Erichs, who were inducted into the Hall of Fame last year in the WCCW. They also wrestled in AWA and in NWA, and they also wrestled with Bill Watts, who was for Bill Watts, who was inducted in the Hall of Fame last year in the UWF. So they're an accomplished tag team. They were a huge rock star phenomenon with a Bad Street USA hit theme, and Michael Hayes currently is the SmackDown head writer. So these should be the ones into the Hall of Fame. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Whom do you think should be entered into the Hall of Fame this very year? Thanks.